There is a place on Cybertron where hope goes to die. Kaon, a city of smoke and steel, and the sound of chains dragging across the floor of the world. Above it, the Senate laughs, secure in their towers of light, blind to the darkness below. Below it, a miner named D16 learns the first truth of oppression. No one is coming to save you. He digs, he bleeds, he breaks, and when he snaps and finds himself in the gladiator pits, he discovers something else, that a spark crushed long enough either goes dark or it ignites. Most revolutionaries are born in books. Megatron was born in the dirt, a miner, a gladiator, a voice rising from the pit to challenge the heavens themselves. He asked for justice, he pleaded for reform, he begged Cybertron to change without bloodshed, and Cybertron said no. So what happens when peaceful change fails? What happens when a broken world tells a broken man that the only language it understands is violence? The chains didn't forge his tyranny, they forged his resolve. The moment D16 stood in that arena, surrounded by crowds demanding Energon, he realized what every fallen angel eventually learns. If the system will not bend, it must break. But here is the tragic fact Megatron never understood. Liberation is not the same as salvation, and the one who rises to break the chains often becomes the one who binds others in them. A miner in shackles, a warlord in command, the same spark, two different prisons, because the chains didn't make him a tyrant, his choices did. This is Disassembled, Heroes and Villains, and today we descend into the story of the revolutionary who tried to save Cybertron and became its greatest threat. This is the story of Megatron. To understand Megatron's war, you have to understand where it really began. Not in the Senate chambers, not in the battlefield speeches, not even in the spark that bore his name. It began in the arena, where survival wasn't just the goal, it was the gospel. Every strike thrown wasn't just a blow against an opponent, it was a sermon, a revelation, a declaration to the world that he existed, that he would never be silent again. Because in those energon-soaked pits, Megatron found more than strength. He found purpose, he found followers, he found belief. And belief without humility, it's not faith, it's pride. And pride is where every fall begins. Before Megatron became the symbol of an uprising, before his name became a warning whispered in the dark, he learned the truth about Cybertron in the one place honest enough to show it, the arena. Every continuity paints the arena different, but the lessons learned inside it are always the same. In IDW, the arena is not glorious, it is not honored, it is where society disposes of the inconvenient. The functionist ideal says every spark has a purpose, but only if that purpose serves the state. Miners, manual laborers, outliers, dissidents. They are components, replaceable, burnable. So when a miner named D16 is thrown into the pits, there's no cheering crowd waiting for him, no legend to live up to, just the cold certainty that Cybertron has already decided he is worth nothing. But something happens that the state does not expect. He fights. He doesn't fight because he loves violence, he fights because survival is the only protest left to him. Each battle becomes a conversation with the world that tried to bury him. Each victory becomes a declaration that he will not disappear. In those pits, Megatron does not just survive, he witnesses the truth. Not the truth taught in educational data streams, not the truth preached by functionists or senators, the truth that power shapes the world, and those without it are erased. The arena is where Megatron learns that Cybertron is not broken accidentally, it is broken by design. And when the state sees that he refuses to die, it tries to break him another way. They beat him, drug him, silence him, but that is how revolutions begin, not with a speech, but with the moment someone realizes the world has declared war on them long before they ever fought back. In the aligned continuity, the arena evolves into something far more dangerous. Here, Megatron's battles are not just survival, they're spectacle. Crowds chant his name, miners and outcasts gather around him, his fists become punctuation marks in a sermon that Cybertron cannot ignore. Every victory becomes a platform, every roar from the stands becomes validation, every blow becomes a reminder. The people are listening. This is where Megatron becomes more than D16, where the gladiator becomes the philosopher, where the philosopher becomes the leader. He speaks between matches about injustice, about freedom, about the world that refuses to acknowledge the sparks bleeding for its towers. He writes manifestos that travel further than any miner's voice. He becomes dangerous not because he is strong, but because others begin to believe in him. It builds him, forges him, fight by fight. Two continuities, two different cages, but they all teach Megatron the same lesson. Cybertron does not respond to fairness. Cybertron responds to force. And if the world cannot hear the weak, then it must become loud enough that it cannot ignore him. This is where the miner becomes a fighter, where the fighter becomes a symbol, where the symbol becomes a spark powerful enough to ignite a war. It's not the violence. Megatron never kills for pleasure, it's the clarity. In the arenas, he sees what Cybertron could be: strong, united, honest, equal in struggle and equal in ambition. No castes, no functionist labels, no senate telling him who deserves to live and who deserves to break in the mines. The arena is brutal, but it is truthful. It is the only place Megatron has ever seen the rules are the same for everyone. And that truth becomes intoxicating. He believes a world built on truth would be far better, fairer, cleaner. He believes the arena has revealed Cybertron's future, and he believes he must build it. When Megatron looks up from the arena floor, whether in IDW's Energon-stained pits or Marvel's grim crucible, he does not see glory. If the system will not protect the innocent, then the system must be replaced. Not adjusted, not debated, replaced. Not from evil, not from conquest, but from the belief that Cybertron must be shattered before it can ever be saved. And this is the truth no one wants to admit. Megatron does not choose violence because he loves war. He chooses violence because Cybertron taught him it is the only language the powerful speak. In every continuity, in every telling, the arena gives him the clarity he needed and the conviction he never loses. To remake Cybertron, he must break the world. But if the arena forged Megatron's body, it was the silence afterward that forged his mind. Because after every fight, every cheer, every spilled drop of energon, D16 returned to the same place he'd always known, the tunnels of Kaon. The weight of the caste system pressing heavier than any opponent he'd ever faced. Down there, the real battle was not for survival, but for meaning. And here is the quiet truth no Decepticon ever wants to admit. Megatron didn't begin as a conqueror. He began as a reader, a thinker, a worker who dared to imagine that Cybertron could be more than a machine grinding its pores into dust. And once he learned to put those thoughts into words, he became dangerous. Because words spread faster than revolution, and ideas, his ideas, were starting to take shape. The gladiator who had learned to endure pain had discovered something far more powerful, that the system itself could bleed. And once he realized that, the war stopped being a possibility. It became an inevitability. Revolution never begins in the moment the first weapon is raised. It begins earlier, quieter, and the conversations people are afraid to have, and the questions the powerful refuse to answer. And for Megatron, the revolution begins the moment he realizes that Cybertron will never listen to its own forgotten children, unless someone forces it to. In IDW, Megatron does not rise because of brute strength. He rises because of ideas, because of the words he hammers into datapads after grueling shifts in the mines, because of the truth he refuses to swallow. His early writings are not manifestos of domination. They are essays on justice, on freedom, on the value of every spark. They speak of a Cybertron where miners are not scrap, where seekers are not tools, where functionists cannot sentence a spark to a lifetime of servitude based solely on an alt mode. And Cybertron responds. Miners began passing his essays like contraband. Dissatisfied workers quote him. Senators curse his name in private chambers. Security officers study him. And one of them, Orion Pax, finds hope in him. And for a moment, a fragile, miraculous moment, Megatron believes change is possible. That Cybertron can reform itself. That the system can be repaired. But then the state reveals its hand. His writings are outlawed, his followers are arrested, his voice is beaten into silence by security services led by Zeta Prime. And that is where Megatron realizes he has misunderstood Cybertron. Oppression's not a flaw in the system. Oppression is the system. The moment the truth sinks in, the miner becomes something far more dangerous, a revolutionary with nothing left to lose. He builds cells in secret. He unites miners, flight crews, data workers, and discarded functionists. He speaks to crowds in alleys and loaded bays. He refuses to bow in order to kneel. This is not the birth of a tyrant, this is the birth of a leader the old world fears. In the aligned continuity, Megatron becomes a revolutionary through the raw force of presence. Now a gladiator turned philosopher, he transforms the arena from entertainment into a pulpit. His speeches ignite sparks across Kaon. Workers begin to chant his name not as D16, not as a champion, but as a promise. He speaks of a world without castes, a world where the council cannot decide what a spark is worth, a world where the weak are not abandoned to rust. And Cybertron listens. In the aligned continuity, crowds gather outside the arena after his matches. Miners begin quoting his declarations. Young archivists, like Orion, record his words and study them. Megatron creates a movement because Cybertron is starving for one. But power is never blind. The Senate sees the crowd, the High Council grows nervous, Megatron's popularity shifts from threat to inevitability, and when Megatron stands before the Council, he believes they will acknowledge what Cybertron has already seen, that he is the future, that he is the answer. But they do not choose him, they choose Orion, and the revolutionary spark that aligned Megatron once nurtured collapsed into something colder. If the system will not change with him, it will be changed without mercy. In Transformers 1, the revolution takes root in the tension between destiny and defiance. Megatronus rises from miner to icon, admired for both strength and clarity. He studies the legends of the Primes, especially the one whose name he adopts, and he believes he might be the next spark destined to reshape Cybertron. What he does not expect is to find a peer who shares that hunger. Orion is not his rival in this continuity, not at first. He is the partner Megatronus believes fate has sent him. They debate, they dream, they plan. But when Orion begins to win the favor of Cybertron's elite, Megatron watches the future he imagined slipped into someone else's hand, and so his revolution becomes something darker. Not just the fight to change the world, but the fight to be the one who leads that change. Different stories, different details, but the same turning point repeats in every continuity. Megatron stops believing Cybertron can be convinced. He starts believing Cybertron must be forced. Now, the revolutionary becomes a strategist. He organizes the miners into a united labor force. He recruits seekers whose wings cast shadows over Iacon. He gives the disenfranchised a cause, a symbol, a voice. He proposes reforms, only to watch the council dismiss them. He begs for equality, only to be met with violence. He pleads for justice, only to learn the system rewards cruelty. So Megatron adapts. If the oppressors will not yield, they will be removed. If the caste system will not collapse, it will be torn down. If Cybertron will not evolve, it will be reborn. This is the first true birth of the Decepticon movement, not as conquerors, but as reformers who have run out of patience. And Cybertron does not yet understand the cost of ignoring them. Megatron's early revolution differs across timelines, but its heartbeat is the same. He wins loyalty because he listens to the unheard. He wins fear because he stops listening to anyone else. In IDW, the first Decepticons strike strategic outposts. Megatron's writings circulate faster than the Senate can suppress them. The workers of Kaon adopt the Decepticon's sigil as a promise of liberation. In Aligned, miners rally behind him. Cities whisper about the gladiator who speaks the truth. The council sees the uprising forming before their optics. In Transformers 1, supporters gather around Megatron as the one bot willing to challenge the elite. His name becomes a prophecy. His ambition becomes identity. These early victories create a momentum that Cybertron cannot stop, and like every revolution in history, once the oppressed realize a system can bleed, the war becomes inevitable. There comes a moment in every version of Megatron's life where the revolutionary makes a choice, to stop asking for change and start creating it. For IDW Megatron, that moment is a realization. Reform has failed, the state will only understand us when it fears us. For Aligned Megatron, it's humiliation. If I am not chosen to lead Cybertron, then I will choose myself. For Transformers 1 Megatron, it is a betrayal of destiny. If the Matrix rejects me, then I will forge a new fate. And in every universe, Cybertron prepares to reap the consequences of ignoring the miner who saw the truth first. This is the rise of the revolutionary, not a tyrant, not yet. This is Megatron when his ideals are still bright, when equality is still the goal, when liberation is still the dream. This is Megatron before the corruption, before the obsession, before the war grinds his spark down to metal filings. This is the version of him that believes he could remake the world into something just. And he is the version of Megatron that the Autobots will later mourn, because they will never again face an enemy who believes in anything this noble. This is the Megatron the world created, the Megatron it deserved, the Megatron who will become something far darker because Cybertron refused the future he offered. Before we step away from the revolutionary who tried to recreate Cybertron, not with wisdom, but with wrath, make sure to follow or subscribe to Disassembled Heroes and Villains on your favorite podcast app. Each week, we unmask the icons and monsters who shape pop culture, and ask what their rise, their fall, and their fire reveals about us. And next week, we turn from the tyrant who sees power to the traitor who hungers for it. If Megatron is power corrupted, Starscream is power coveted. The eternal usurper, the schemer with a smile, the soldier who would burn the empire he serves just to sit upon its ashes. He calls himself loyal, he calls himself worthy, but behind every oath waits a blade. Next week, we descend into the ambition sharpened to a killing edge. We meet the ghost of every coup, every betrayal, and every doomed rebellion. Next week, we face Starscream of the Transformers. Now back to the rise of the miner who became a movement, Megatron. But ambition is never born in a vacuum, not even Starscream's. Every traitor is shaped by the leaders who came before them, and Megatron shaped more than an army. He shaped a generation. And that brings us back to the moment where everything, the revolution, the ideology, the hope, collapsed into something colder. Because before he was a tyrant, before he carved his manifesto into Cybertron with cannon fire, Megatron had a brother, not by creation, by conviction. Orion Pax believed in him, believed in the movement, believed in the future they could build together. But the council made its choice, and so did they. One rose, one broke, and a friendship powerful enough to change a planet and stood toward apart. The war didn't begin with armies, it began with a fracture between two sparks who wanted the same world, but were willing to pay very different prices to create it. Every revolution has a moment when the dream breaks, not because the cause is wrong, but because the world refuses to let it live. For Megatron and Orion Pax, that moment is the fracture that echoes across every continuity, told differently each time, but always with the same wound at its center. Two bots that believed in the same future finally understand they believe in two very different paths. In IDW, the break is not theatrical. There's no council chamber, no ceremonial rejection, no dramatic coronation. The tragedy of IDW is quieter, colder, more personal. Orion Pax starts as the one person inside the system who believes in Megatron's words. He reads every essay, every manifesto, every plea for justice. He believes Megatron is not merely angry, he's right. But as Megatron's movement grows, the violence grows with it. Arson, sabotage, targeted strikes against functionist infrastructure, workers turning into militants because Cybertron has offered them nothing less. Orion tries to hold the line between justice and chaos. Megatron tries to burn down the line entirely. They meet only a handful of times, but each meeting becomes heavier. Orion urges restraint. Megatron warns him that restraint is a privilege of the powerful, and that the state delivers its verdict. Security services arrest Megatron, beat him, humiliate him, attempt to silence the ideals they cannot argue with. Orion sees the brutality firsthand. He understands Megatron's anger, but he also sees the cost of Megatron's new resolve. Megatron no longer wants to reform, he wants revolution. In IDW, they do not fall apart over a single betrayal, they fall apart over a philosophy that is tearing the world in half. Orion rises into the system, trying to clean it from within. Megatron rises against the system, determined to break it open. Two sparks moving in opposite directions, pulled apart by the gravity of a dying world. But this is the heartbreak of IDW. There was never one moment where they became enemies, just 1,000 small moments where neither could follow the other anymore. In the aligned continuity, the fracture is immediate, violent, and irreversible. Here, Megatron and Orion are partners, allies. Two Cybertronians walking into the High Council chamber believing, truly believing, that the world is finally ready to change. Megatron speaks with passion. Orion speaks with clarity. They present a unified vision of a freer Cybertron, and the Council listens. But when the moment comes, they do not choose the miner who sacrificed everything. In the arena, they don't choose the miner who sacrificed everything in the arena, who built the movement from the ground up, who inspired half the planet to stand for the first time in their lives. They choose Orion, not because he's stronger, not because he's wiser, but because he's safe, clean, uncomplicated. Orion accepts the honor with humility, but Megatron feels only the knife. The Council did not just deny him the mantle of Prime, they denied him acknowledgement, validation, justice. In Megatron's optics, they choose the archivist who merely studied the world's suffering over the gladiator who lived it, and in that moment, something breaks in him that will never heal. He believes Orion betrayed him. He believes the Council mocked him. He believes Cybertron has chosen stagnation over freedom. So Megatron stops asking, he stops debating, he stops compromising, he stops hoping the system can be reformed. He walks out of that chamber with a new clarity. If Cybertron fears him, then Cybertron will obey him. If Cybertron denies him, then Cybertron will kneel. If Cybertron rejects his dream, then he will carve a new one from its ruins. This is the wound that aligned Megatron never recovers from. Not a wound of violence, but a wound of humiliation. A wound inflicted by a world he tried to save. In Transformers 1, the break comes not as rejection, but as revelation. Megatron sees himself as the future of Cybertron, the miner chosen by fate, the gladiator forged into something greater, and for a moment, Orion is the one spark who understands him, who matches him in ambition, who argues, debates, dreams, and dares to imagine a different world. They're friends, brothers in purpose, if not in spark. But Cybertron sees something else in Orion, something Megatronus cannot compete with: potential without danger, reform without fear, leadership without revolution. When the Matrix chooses Orion, it is not a humiliation like an Aligned, it is the theft of destiny. Megatron watches the future he envisioned crumble. The path he believed was his alone suddenly belongs to someone else. The power he thought he was born for flows into Orion's hands, and the truth dawns on him like a storm. If destiny will not choose him, he will choose himself. 3 universes, 3 different wounds, but the same outcome every time. Megatron and Orion Pax become enemies not because they disagree, but because they cannot coexist. Megatron's revolution demands total change. Orion's reform demands stability. Megatron sees a world that must be shattered. Orion sees one that can still be saved. Megatron believes Cybertron must be reborn from struggle. Orion believes Cybertron must be protected from it. And once the Council elevates Orion, whether through ceremony or ideology, through destiny or through institutional preference, the divide becomes permanent. What was once admiration turns to resentment. What was once partnership becomes opposition. What was once brotherhood becomes war. This is the turning point of Megatron's life. The tragedy that every continuity confirms. He did not begin as a tyrant. He did not begin as a conqueror. He began as someone who believed the world could be better. But when the world chose someone else to lead it, someone safer, someone gentler, someone less willing to tear apart the structures holding Cybertron together, Megatron made his choice. If Cybertron could not rise with him, it would rise under him. This is the moment the Brotherhood breaks. This is the wound that never heals. This is the spark that ignites the war. Brotherhoods don't end with one choice, they end with every choice that follows. And once Megatron lost Orion Pax, he didn't just lose a friend, he lost the last voice capable of pulling him back from the edge. Because after that day, something in him calcified. The miner who wrote manifestos became the commander who issued ultimatums. The revolutionary who fought for freedom became the warlord who believed only he could define it. And Cybertron, already cracking under the weight of its own history, became the proving ground for this new truth. If peace could not be given, it would be taken. And from this point forward, the war stops being a reaction, it becomes a vocation. Every battlefield an argument, every conquest a sermon, every fallen soldier another line in the scripture Megatron carved into creation. Optimus saw tragedy in the ruins around him. Megatron saw potential. Because for him, war was no longer a means to an end. War was the end. The crucible in which he believed the new Cybertron could finally be forged. And once a dream needs energon to survive, the dreamer is already gone. Some wars are fought to win. Megatron's war was fought to become. Because once the Brotherhood shattered, once Optimus became a prime and Megatron became the antithesis to everything that title stood for, the revolution no longer resembled the dream that began in the minds. It mutated, and so did he. The war didn't just reshape Cybertron, it reshaped Megatron's spark. In the early days, his forces were idealists, workers, voices of the ignored, but war corrodes idealism faster than rust, and sooner than anyone realized, even Megatron himself, the Decepticons stopped being a movement. They became an empire. Meetings became orders, debates became decrees, followers became subjects, and Megatron, once a voice for the voiceless, now demanded absolute silence from anyone who challenged him. In IDW, this turn is brutal and unmistakable. A leader born from oppression becomes the architect of executions, judging who deserves to live in the Cybertron he imagined, and who was simply in his way. The bot who once wrote essays on freedom begins killing dissenters in the name of liberation. He doesn't notice the contradiction, he only notices the resistance. Because once Megatron believed he alone was the axis around which justice could spin, every alternative path looked like treason. Cybertron didn't simply fear Megatron, it obeyed him. Not because he inspired them now, but because he commanded them. And this is where the dream begins to cannibalize the dreamer. Animated takes his evolution and gives it a mask so polished it gleams. Here, Megatron is almost regal, controlled, deliberate, a tyrant who doesn't rule from the shadows, but through sheer charisma and absolute certainty. His voice carries a strange comfort, a cold assurance that the world makes sense under his dominion. If Optimus represents humility, Megatron represents inevitability. This version doesn't rage, he dictates. He speaks in the tone of someone who believes the universe has already agreed to his terms. The tyranny isn't chaotic, it's curated, elegant, strategic. Where IDW's Megatron becomes monstrous through rage, Animated's Megatron becomes monstrous through order. A tyrant who believes the most compassionate thing he can do is take choice away. And beneath both versions lies the same rot. The war could have ended, he just never wanted it to. Because peace would force him to confront what he had become. War allowed him to pretend he was still moving towards something better. But nowhere is Megatron's descent more viscerally captured than in live-action films, particularly the Battle of Chicago. This is the emotional centerpiece of Megatron's modern legacy, not because it redefines his ideology, but because it stripped away whatever ideology he still pretended to have. Chicago is not a battlefield, it's a massacre. There is no rhetoric, no revolution, no philosophical justification, just bodies. Buildings collapsing, civilians vaporized, a city turned into a monument of ash and steel. In Megatron, he stands at the center of it all, not as a liberator, not even as a conqueror, but as a force of devastation. Optimus sees Chicago as trauma. Megatron sees it as leverage. Optimus wants to protect the dying. Megatron wants the survivors to sit. Optimus hesitates, grieves, questions. Megatron seizes advantage, demands obedience, mocks suffering. This Megatron is a king of ruins, his throne built from the bones of a city humanity will never forget, and Transformer fans will never forgive. The war is no longer about Cybertron, it's about domination for its own sake, and in that moment, something terrifying becomes clear. Megatron is no longer revolutionary. He's a predator who has learned how to speak. Optimus sees loss, Megatron sees opportunity. Across continuities, this contrast becomes the dividing line between their souls. Optimus sees every battle as a failure. Megatron sees every battle as a lesson. Optimus is haunted by the sparks lost on both sides. Megatron counts sparks like currency. Optimus would ask, what will this cost? Megatron asks, what will this buy? Optimus carries the weight of the fallen. Megatron carries only the ambition of the future. This is why the war never ends. Not because Megatron can't win, but because Megatron doesn't want it to. A world at peace would leave him purposeless. A world in conflict gives him reason to exist. To Optimus, war is tragedy. But to Megatron, war is validation. Every scar proves he was right. Every body proves he was chosen. Every victory proves destiny favors him. Megatron convinces himself that the war is a burden, when the truth is far darker. The war is his identity. There is an almost theological undertone to Megatron's transformation. Across lore, he begins as a servant of the system, someone expected to toil quietly in the dark, and like every mythic rebel who rises from the underworld, he begins to believe the light belongs to him alone. And here, the Lucifer comparison becomes unavoidable. Both began as voices challenging an order they believed is unjust. Both attracted followers through brilliance and charisma. Both believed they could rule better than their creators. And both fell from the cause they once championed into a tyranny of their own making. He wanted control more than peace, and that is the truth of Megatron. Because control could be shaped, control could be justified, control could never betray him the way Orion Pax did. Peace, however, required trust. And Megatron lost the ability to trust long before he lost the ability to love. In the end, he doesn't just ascend, he ascends alone. A king without subjects, a conqueror without joy, a savior who destroyed the world he wanted to save. At this stage in his evolution, Megatron's leadership becomes something more than conquest. It becomes self-reinforcement. Every time Cybertron burns, he tells himself the fire is cleansing. Every time he imposes order, he tells himself chaos demanded it. Every time someone dies, he tells himself the cause required it. The war stops being a battlefield, it becomes a mirror. And in that mirror, Megatron sees not the miner he once was, but the god he believes he is becoming. That's why he cannot be stopped. Not because the Autobots stand against him, not because Optimus refuses to yield, not because the Decepticons need him, because the moment the war ends, Megatron would face the one truth he cannot bear. He destroyed Cybertron with the same brutality used against him. His revolution has devoured its prophet. His ideology has erased its author. His dreams has cannibalized the dreamer. Look closely at Megatron's leadership across continuities and a pattern emerges. He centralizes power, he eliminates rivals, he weaponizes loyalty, he punishes dissent, he creates crises to justify further control. It's not accidental. It's the inevitable endpoint of a revolutionary who mistakes himself for a revolution. In G1, this manifests as simple tyranny. Megatron seeks power because power is there to be taken. In Animated, it becomes strategic dominion. Megatron sees himself as the rightful ruler of Cybertron and views Optimus as an obstacle to order. In IDW, it becomes ideological purification. Megatron believes the weak must be removed, the corrupt destroyed, and the true Cybertron reforged. In the Bayverse, it becomes cosmic predation. Megatron is no longer political, he's apocalyptic. Every universe tells the same truth in a different language. Once Megatron decided he was the only Cybertronian who deserved to shape the future, no one else's spark mattered. The dream became a kingdom, the kingdom became a throne, the throne became a prison, and the prisoner was Megatron. Megatron never won the war, but he also never truly lost it. Because the war was never about victory, it was about identity. Megatron didn't need Cybertron to kneel, he needed Cybertron to resist him, because resistance proved he was powerful enough to crush it. He didn't need Optimus to fall, he needed Optimus to stand, because Optimus was the last reminder of who he used to be. He didn't need peace. Peace would have killed the myth he carved out of pain. Megatron needed the war to last forever, because the war was the only place where he still felt like the hero he once dreamed of becoming. In that way, Megatron is not just a villain, he's a warning. A revolutionary who mistook power for purpose, a leader who mistook domination for destiny, a spark who mistook suffering for truth. And once a dream demands the world bow before it, that dream is no longer liberation, it's hunger. Megatron did not simply fight the war, he became it. And the war, in turn, consumed him. War consumes everything. Cities, armies, brothers. But its cruelest feast to the one who wages it. Because after millennia of conquest, after the betrayals and the massacres, after the ideology rotted into an appetite for power, Megatron begins to feel something he was certain he had buried long ago. Not doubt, not regret, something stranger. Fatigue. The kind that settles into metal and memory, the kind that makes even the tyrants look at the ashes and ask, what was all this for? And when a warlord grows tyrant, the universe changes. Some call it awakening, some call it guilt, some call it survival instinct wearing a softer mask, but Megatron, he calls it clarity. He says he wants peace now, he says he wants forgiveness, he says he wants to rebuild what he helped destroy, and maybe he means it. Or maybe this is simply his last, most sophisticated transformation, the final evolution of a tyrant who once believed destiny bowed to him. Because even the darkest figures in scripture understood this truth. Even Satan disguised himself as an angel of light. Which raises the question we face next. When Megatron reaches for redemption, is it healing? Or is it just another way to hold power? Redemption or delusion? Redemption is a word we use too easily. A word we give to people we want to believe in. A word that can blind us to the difference between true change and a clever mask. And in the long, violent history of Cybertron, no name makes that question more dangerous than Megatron. For generations, Megatron wasn't just the tyrant, the shadow over Cybertron, the architect of its ruin, the spark that turned revolution into genocide. And yet, across continuities, something happens that no one, not Optimus, not the Autobots, not even Megatron himself, ever expected. He stops. Not because he's defeated, but because he loses faith in his cause, but because something deeper shifts inside him. A weariness, a reckoning, a moment where the monster looks in the mirror and sees not destiny, but devastation. The question is simple. The answer is not. Megatron's heel turn is so seismic it feels like a myth. After ages of brutality, he surrenders. Voluntarily. No grand battle, no spectacular defeat, he simply walks into Autobot custody and asks to be judged. And the galaxy erupts. Because how do you try someone whose sin spans millennia? How do you weigh the death of worlds? How do you sentence a bot who has rewritten the moral architecture of the universe? Megatron doesn't flee this question, he demands it. In the courtroom, he sits calm, almost serene. He admits to every atrocity, every order, every death. He does not defend himself, he does not justify himself. The warlord who once believed he alone could shape Cybertron now believes Cybertron has the right to decide what he deserves. And in that moment, something impossible happened. Megatron feels guilt. Not the performative guilt of a politician, not the sullen guilt of someone who wants a shorter sentence. A grief so vast, like he's finally feeling the weight of every spark he extinguished. But guilt alone is not redemption. Even the most dangerous monsters can regret the consequences of their own ambition without understanding the harm they've done to others. IDW forces Megatron, and us, to confront this uncomfortable truth. Does repentance count if the only person you're sorry for is yourself? That trial leads to a moment so controversial, it shook the Transformers community. Megatron becomes an Autobot. Not as a prisoner, not as a covert agent, as a part of a crew. He's placed aboard the Lost Light, a ship filled with people who suffer directly from his rule. They hate him, they fear him, some want him dead, and yet, Megatron tries. He studies, he listens, he reflects, he apologizes, not for the war, but for what he became inside of it. And for a time, it feels real. He mourns the dead, he protects the innocent, he questions the dogma he once wrote, he even forged something like friendships. But healing is not the same as absolution. And aboard that ship, one truth gnaws at him with every quiet cycle. No matter how far he travels, he can't outrun the spilled energon. Because every good deed becomes a shadow of the horrors he committed. Every moment of peace is haunted by memories of a pain he caused. Every step forward is weighed by the knowledge that billions of sparks will never have the chance to take one. This is the burden Megatron carries, the burden of a survivor whose survival cost the world itself. And eventually, this burden breaks him. He realizes he cannot be who he was, but he also realizes he cannot become the person he wants to be. And in that tension, his redemption arc becomes something stranger, something harder to name, something tragic. Not triumph, not forgiveness, but resignation. Resignation to the truth that he can never be who he was, and can never become who he wants to be. Resignation to existing in the space between monster and martyr, a space with no name, no glory, no peace. Across every continuity where Mega's long enough to confront his legacy, the same threat emerges. He's tired. Not battlefield tired, not physically exhausted, existentially tired. War was his purpose, victory was his justification, domination was his proof he was right. But age turns even tyranny into tedium. In some stories, this fatigue turns to reflection, and others bitterness, and others delusion. But the spark behind his optics no longer burns with the fire of a revolutionary. It flickers, it doubts, it dims. And the dangerous thing about this tyrant is this. They often mistake fatigue for enlightenment. They think stopping the violence makes them virtuous. They think laying down their weapon makes them wise. They think their remorse is enough to erase their sins. But remorse, without accountability, is just vanity, and Megatron, for all his brilliance, is vulnerable to that vanity. If your entire life was built on the belief that you were the only one who could save the world, that even your repentance becomes another way of centering yourself. This is the razor on which Megatron's redemption rests. Is he seeking forgiveness, or is he seeking significance? Earthspark offers a different vision of Megatron, one where he not only abandons the Decepticon cause, but actively works with humans, Autobots, even families. Gone is the general who commands legions. Gone is the tyrant who speaks in absolutes. He trades his throne for an armored alt mode and a soldier's simplicity. He fights only when necessary. He protects humans as fiercely as he once oppressed them. He shows genuine love for the Malto family. He challenges Ghost when they mistreat the very Decepticons he used to command. He is no longer trying to rule the world. He is trying to fit in it. But even here, the questions linger. He wants the Decepticons to be treated fairly, yet he was the one who radicalized many of them. He wants peace, yet peace only arrived after his wars burned Cybertron beyond repair. He wants to mentor the next generation, yet the last generation he mentored became soldiers in a war they never asked for. And that's what makes Earthspark Megatron so compelling. He's trying to heal a wound he inflicted, not because the world needs him, but because he cannot bear to be the monster he once became. Is that redemption, or simply a bot trying to escape his own legacy? Earthspark offers the most hopeful vision of Megatron, but hope is not the same as absolution, because even the kindest version of Megatron cannot undo the cruelest one, and that is the weight he carries in every universe, the knowledge that his best self will always be haunted by its worst. Here we reach the fulcrum of his entire character. Megatron is not simply a political radical turned tyrant. His story touches something ancient, something biblical. In myth, the greatest villains are never mindless, their fallen ideals. Broken angels, beings who believed they were chosen, righteous, enlightened, and use that belief to justify atrocities. They figure they resemble most is not a conqueror, it's a tempter, a leader, a luminary, a being once capable of greatness. But as scripture warns, even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. So what do we make of Megatron's softer years? His apologies, his mentorship, his new alliances? Is it the light of redemption, or the dangerous glow of a self-certainty returning to a new form? Because the hardest truth is this: Megatron does not repent by becoming small. He repents by becoming important in a different way. He wants to be the one who saves. He wants to be the one who rebuilds. He wants to be the one who teaches. In other words, he still wants to be the center. The tyrant may have discarded his crown, but he never stopped being a figure who needs a throne, even if that throne is carved from guilt instead of glory. What makes Megatron fascinating is that every continuity treats his redemption differently. IDW asks if guilt is enough. Earthspark asks if change is possible. Aligned asks whether friendship can ever truly heal the wounds of betrayal. G1 asks nothing, because G1 Megatron never seeks forgiveness at all. But taken together, a pattern emerges across the multiverse. Megatron wants redemption. He even strives for it. But wanting redemption and deserving redemption are not the same thing. And that's a tragic fact at the heart of his later years. He is no longer the tyrant who wants to rule. He is the survivor who wants to be understood. He seeks meaning in the ruins he created. He seeks mercy from the universe he once scorched. He seeks an identity not built on domination, but on absolution. Yet absolution cannot be taken. It must be given. And the people Megatron harmed, the billions he killed, the soldiers he manipulated, the worlds he ravaged, cannot speak anymore. There is no one left alive who can forgive him, so Megatron walks with a burden no Prime ever carried. A redemption story without anyone to redeem him. Is that noble? Is that delusion? Is that punishment? Or is it the final proof that even Megatron, even at his gentlest, cannot escape the shadow he cast across the cosmos? In the end, redemption for Megatron is not a path. It's a question. One that haunts him, one that haunts us, one that will never have a definitive answer. Because redemption requires two things Megatron never had: a world willing to forgive him, and a self willing to disappear. And Megatron, brilliant, broken, brutal, tender, and unexpected moments, has never known how to be anything but central to the story. Megatron is not redeemed. Megatron is not condemned. Megatron is searching. Searching for a peace he cannot earn, for a future he cannot shape, for a forgiveness that may never come. Redemption or delusion? Only the shadow of the warlord can tell. Redemption, guilt, delusion, rebirth. Megatron has worn all of them like armor, but if there's one thing his long life teaches us, it's this: there is no single Megatron. Every continuity looks at him and sees something different: a tyrant, a revolutionary, a monster, a martyr, a warning. Cybertron keeps reinventing him because Megatron is not just a character, he's a myth, a shape the story takes whenever it needs us to ask the hardest questions. What does power do to a good man? What does obsession do to a great one? And how far can a spark fall until there's no light left to disguise itself with? We've seen the miner, we've seen the revolutionary, we've seen the warlord, we've seen the penitent. But if they're only fragments of a much larger figure, faces carved across universes, each revealing a different truth about who Megatron is, and what he could have been. So now, we widen the lens, we step across continuities, across timelines, across interpretations, to meet the Megatrons who built a legend, and the ones who broke it. Megatron is not a single story, the constellation of them, a myth refracted through decades, reshaped by every era, every medium and writer who needed a villain powerful enough to challenge the very idea of hope. Each continuity looks at Megatron and asks a different question, each answers with a different face, and through these faces, a pattern emerges. Megatron endures because the world always has more than one fear for him to wear. Let's meet them. G1, the Warlord. The archetype, the template, the shadow every later Megatron stains inside. If Megatron has a pure form, this is it. Not morally, but structurally. G1 Megatron is the embodiment of power for power's sake. Not a fallen revolutionary, not a betrayed idealist, not a philosopher twisted into a tyrant. He is the ambition in its simplest, sharpest shape. He wants the throne because the throne exists. He wants the Matrix because Optimus has it. He wants Cybertron because it is his by right. There is no tragedy beneath the metal, no broken dream to mourn, no friendship to grieve, and in that absence, G1 Megatron becomes something even more iconic. A blueprint. the warlord whose voice shakes empires, the tyrant whose rage bends armies, the villain whose very name becomes synonymous with domination. He is the absence of nuance, a blade without rust, a threat without hesitation, and for that reason, he remains the foundation upon which every future Megatron is built, or built to surpass. The Bay films give us something older, darker, a conqueror whose age is calcified into cruelty. Bayverse Megatron is not ancient in years, but in purpose. He does not fight for revolution or philosophy. He fights because conflict is the only environment in which his spark can breathe. Across these films, Megatron resurrects again and again, like a broken demigod clawing his way out of myth. Frozen tyrant, reforged weapon, diseased creature of metal and malice. Each body he wears is worse than the last. Each form breaks, but his rage survives. Mutating, festering, refusing to die. And then there's Chicago. The Battle of Chicago is not a war, it's a cataclysm. Buildings collapse like paper, civilians are vaporized mid-run, a city is devoured by a conflict it never invited. Megatron stands among the ruins not as a leader, but as an apex predator. Optimus sees tragedy, Megatron sees opportunity, another fallen world to build a kingdom of ashes upon. His brutality overshadows his strategy. His survival overshadows his purpose. He's no longer a king fighting to reclaim a throne. He is a fallen king clinging to violence because it's the only thing left that proves he exists. IDW. The most layered, most ambitious, most intellectually dangerous Megatron ever written. Where G1 gives us a tyrant, IDW gives us the entire arc. Poet, revolutionary, warlord, tyrant, prisoner, penitent. This Megatron begins as a thinker, his words ignite movements, his essays challenge the Senate, his philosophy inspires a generation, then his ideas curdle. Violence consumes necessity, reform turns into cleansing fire. In IDW, Megatron becomes an idea as much as a person, the political gravity so strong it warps every spark around him. Cybertron's moral paradox is written to his frame. He is the victim and the villain, the liberator and the butcher, the philosopher who believed in equality, and the tyrant who believed only he could define it. And then comes the impossible. He begins to repent. He stands trial, he confesses, he joins the Autobots, not as a spy or a weapon, but as someone desperate to rebuild the world he destroyed. IDW Megatron is not redeemed. He is not forgiven. He is not absolved. He is aware, and that awareness becomes a curse. No other continuity lets Megatron face the weight of his sins so directly, or shows how heavy that weight truly is. If G1 Megatron is the warlord, IDW Megatron is the philosopher who became one, and then spent the rest of his life trying to become something else. Before the warlord, before the revolutionary, before the tyrant, there was simply a miner named D16. Transformers 1 shows us the Megatron who came before the myth, a young, idealistic Energon miner who believed in rules, order, and structure. Someone who admired Megatron's prime not because of power, but because of principle. This Megatron had a friend, a bright-eyed miner named Orion Pax, who sneaks into archives and dreams like an archivist. He has hopes, he has purpose, he even has a moral compass, but the world breaks him. Corruption, deception, but violence. Truth reveals that shatter the foundations of everything he believed Cybertron was. And in that moment, the moment the universe proves it will never reward obedience, D16 cracks. He realizes the system he worshipped was built on lies. He realizes the order he upheld was a cage. He realizes the power he trusted has already chosen who it wishes to exploit. The seeds of greatness are planted, but right beside them, the seeds of damnation. Because every tyrant begins as someone who sees the world for what it is, and decides they can fix it through force. Transformers 1 gives us the first spark of that decision, the spark that will one day ignite a war spanning universes. Not every version of Megatron fits cleanly into these archetypes. Some twist the myth, some parody it, some deepen it in ways that demand their own spotlight. Animated Megatron, the regal tyrant, a general as refined as his ruthlessness. Cyberverse Megatron, the charismatic gladiator whose tragedy unfolds in real time. Unicron Trilogy Megatron, the war god, the ascendant conqueror who seeks cosmic dominion. Shattered Glass Megatron, the hero, the revolutionary who becomes the symbol he hates in every universe. Energon Universe Megatron, the new warlord rising from Skybound's modern reimagining. Each of these Megatrons hold a piece of the myth, a fragment of the tyrant, a glimmer of the fallen king, a whisper of the poet turned warlord, and each deserves a deeper dive. But not today. Today we focus on the four faces that shape Megatron's legacy: the warlord, the fallen king, the redeemed tyrant, and the spark of tyranny itself. All of them true, all of them incomplete, all of them reflections of the same idea: that power, once taken into the spark, reshapes everything it touches, even the one who wields it. Across universes, across timelines, across the shifting mirrors of continuity, Megatron changes his face, but never his lesson. Every version reveals a different facet, yet each returns to the same truth. Megatron isn't a tyrant because he's strong, he's a tyrant because he's certain. Certain he's right, certain he sees what others cannot, certain the world will only be saved when he finally bends to his will. And that certainty, unyielding, unquestioned, wholly in its conviction, is the thread tying every Megatron together. G1's Conqueror, Bay vs. Fallen King, IDW's Repentant Revolutionary, the young miner in Transformers 1 who believes the system is broken and only he knows how to fix it. All of them are built on the same foundation, a spark that mistakes clarity for truth, and truth for destiny. Megatron's many faces show us his power, but his patterns show us something far more important. Not who he was, but what he warns us about becoming. Megatron is one of the greatest villains in pop culture, not because of the destruction he caused, not because of the war he waged, and not because of the fear his name inspires. Megatron endures because he embodies something far more dangerous, the tyranny of certainty. He is what happens when a righteous man becomes so convinced of his insight, so assured of his truth, that he ceases to believe anyone else deserves a voice. And once a person reaches that point, once they begin to confuse clarity with righteousness, the line between justice and cruelty dissolves. Megatron doesn't cross that line by accident. He crosses it with purpose. Because in his spark, the logic is simple. If the world is broken, if the powerful are corrupt, if the innocent are suffering, then isn't force the only language worth speaking? Isn't mercy just another form of surrender? Isn't compromise just another cage? Megatron teaches us that evil doesn't always masquerade as chaos. Sometimes, it marches under the banner of order. Sometimes, it speaks in the voice of a bot who believes, deeply, fiercely, that he is doing what must be done. And that is what makes him terrifying, not his ambition, his purpose. When Megatron looks at the world, he does not see complexity, he sees clarity. The Senators corrupt, remove them. The Functionists are oppressive, break them. The Autobots stand in the way, erase them. It is a worldview so distilled, so sharpened, that it's become a weapon unto itself. Megatron does not merely act with certainty, he lives with it. And certainty, once unchallenged, does something terrible to a person. It removes doubt, it removes hesitation, it removes empathy. Because if you are certain you are right, then everyone who disagrees must be wrong, and if they're wrong, then why do they accept obstacles? Megatron becomes a tyrant long before he ever sees his power. He becomes a tyrant the moment he decides he cannot be wrong. Because when you cannot be wrong, you cannot be merciful, and when you cannot be merciful, you cannot be just. This is the lesson he embodies more clearly than any Decepticon creed, any battle cry, any political treaty. Even if you're right, that doesn't make you righteous. Megatron begins his journey as a liberator. That much is undeniable. He rises from the mines, he speaks for the unheard, he challenges systems designed to consume Cybertronians like him. But revolutions are fragile. The same fire that ignites freedom can scorch it. The same fury that shatters chains can forge new ones. Megatron never conquers Cybertron to become a tyrant. He becomes a tyrant because he cannot imagine a world where everyone else guides its future. Revolution demands humility to succeed, but Megatron was never humble. He saw injustice and believed he alone had the will to end it. He saw oppression and believed he alone had the vision to replace it. He saw broken Cybertron and believed he alone could rebuild it. And in that belief, noble intention mutates into authoritarian instinct. The tragedy Megatron personifies. When the oppressed become the oppressor, they never notice until it's too late. When justice becomes vengeance, it still speaks the same language of justice. When ideology becomes identity, compromise feels like betrayal. And Megatron cannot compromise. Not with the Senate, not with the Autobots, not with Optimus, not even with the universe itself. What begins as liberation becomes domination, because the revolutionary who cannot question himself is already halfway to becoming a ruler. Megatron does not corrupt through power, he corrupts through conviction. Megatron sees the truth of Cybertron. The system is broken, the people are suffering, the powerful are indifferent, and he is right. But truth, without humility, is a blade, a weapon that cuts indiscriminately. Humility is what keeps truth from becoming cruelty. Humility is what prevents justice from becoming tyranny. Humility is what separates leadership from domination. Megatron has truth, he has vision, he has strength. What he lacks is humility. So his truth becomes harsh, his justice becomes violent, his leadership becomes control. He does not persuade, he imposes. He does not guide, he commands. He does not listen, he corrects. And the terrifying thing, Megatron believes this is kindness. He believes he's saving Cybertron from itself. He believes order must be forced because chaos is too gentle a teacher. This is the tragedy woven through every Megatron in every continuity. Truth without humility becomes cruelty. Justice without mercy becomes tyranny. Megatron embodies both sides of the equation, the noble intention and the terrible result. He is the hero of his own story, and the villain of everyone else's. This is the core of Megatron's legacy. This is what separates him from Optimus Prime, not strength, not intellect, not destiny, but perspective. Optimus sees the world through the lens of responsibility. Megatron sees it through the lens of righteousness. Optimus believes in mercy because he has known loss. Megatron believes in domination because he has known injustice. Optimus leads through doubt. Megatron leads through certainty. And it is that certainty, the belief that he cannot be wrong, that makes Megatron dangerous even when he seeks peace. It's why IDW Megatron struggles with redemption. It's why Earthspark Megatron carries guilt like armor. It's why every continuity returns to the question he embodies. Someone who believes they are chosen ever truly change. Because righteousness, once unchallenged, becomes doctrine. And doctrine, once hardened, becomes violence. Even if you're right, even if your vision is justified, even if your cause is noble, that doesn't make it righteous. Righteousness isn't a conviction, it's a practice. And Megatron never learns how to practice it. Megatron's downfall is not rage, it is not cruelty, it is not ambition. Megatron's downfall is moral clarity without grace. He sees injustice clearly, he sees suffering clearly, he sees the failures of society clearly, but he never sees people clearly. He sees sparks as symbols, he sees citizens as soldiers, he sees dissent as betrayal, he sees weakness as waste. Without grace, his clarity becomes brutality. Without grace, his justice becomes punishment. Without grace, his leadership becomes tyranny. Grace is the ability to see value in others. Grace is the ability to hear voices that contradict your own. Grace is the ability that lets someone else be right, and Megatron cannot allow that. Not because he's cruel, but because he's convinced. Convinced the world needs him, convinced his vision is absolute, convinced that liberation must be enforced, convinced that mercy is weakness. This is the tragedy beneath every atrocity he commits. Megatron does not believe he's a villain. He believes he's the only one brave enough to do what must be done. And that belief, that burning certainty, destroys everything. His friendships, his revolution, his world, and in some continuities, even himself. In the end, Megatron teaches us a lesson older than Cybertron, older than kings, older than war. Evil does not always roar. Sometimes it speaks calmly. Sometimes it speaks beautifully. Sometimes it speaks with conviction. And that's why it's so seductive. Megatron is a warning. A leader without humility becomes a tyrant. A visionary without mercy becomes a monster. A revolutionary without grace becomes the very thing he hates. Megatron shows us the danger of conviction without compassion, of truth without humility, of justice without grace. He is the spark that proves even the noblest intentions can calcify into tyranny when a leader can no longer question himself. But Megatron's story doesn't end with a lesson he failed to learn. It endures because of what he left behind. Every revolution he touched, every soldier he inspired, every world he scarred, became part of a myth larger than the miner, the warlord, or the penitent standing at its center. Cybertron rebuilt itself, the Autobots carried on, the Decepticons fractured, reformed, or repented. But Megatron, he became an idea. A warning, a symbol, a legend whispered across continuities. And that's the paradox of Megatron's legacy. He wanted to free Cybertron, he wanted to remake it, he wanted to save it, but instead, he became the shadow that defines it. So now we step beyond the bot, the tyrant, the revolutionary, and into the imprint he carved into Cybertron's history. What remains after the warlord is gone. Megatron's story is the story of Cybertron, not because he shaped its future, but because he exposed its soul. Long after the battles fade, long after the factions crumble, long after even Optimus Prime becomes a memory whispered through Energon lines, and Megatron remains. Not as a warrior, not as a leader, not even as a villain, but as a myth. Because Megatron is bigger than any one continuity can contain. He is the question every Cybertronian age asks itself. What becomes of a world that cannot save the person who tried to save it by force? Cybertron has known many tyrants. It has known conquerors. It has known warmongers whose lust for domination scorched its metalscape. But Megatron stands apart because he is all of these things, and none of them alone. He began as a miner, he became a revolutionary, he ascended as a warlord, he fell as a monster, he wandered as a penitent. Each stage leaves a mark. To the Autobots, he's the architect of suffering. To surviving Decepticons, he is a god, a betrayer, a prophet, or a ghost. To the galaxy, he is a reminder that Cybertron's war was never just one conflict. It was a fracture in the moral order of the universe. Because Megatron's myth persists, because he sits at the crossroads of every great cultural narrative. The rise of the oppressed, the corruption of power, the fall of ideals, the impossible hope for redemption. Heroes inspire, but villains warn. Megatron does both, and that's why he endures. Noble villains occupy a sacred, dangerous space. They are the ones who seek justice without love, order with compassion, purpose without self-awareness. They become tyrants not because they're malicious, but because they're right, or at least believe they are. Megatron stands beside figures like Macbeth, Ahab, Ozymandias, even Lucifer in his earliest mythic form. Leaders who fall because they cannot imagine a universe that does not bend to truth they alone can see. That is why Megatron resonates, not as a monster, but as a mirror. He shows us the shadow side of conviction. He shows us how ideas can fossilize into dogma. He shows us what happens when a hero refuses to admit he has become the villain. And across universes, Megatron's character is built with startling consistency. He begins with empathy, fighting for the forgotten. He acquires power and uses it in service of certainty. He loses compassion, believing mercy weakens the revolution. He becomes what he fought, an oppressor crowned with purpose. Megatron is noble not because he's good, but because he begins good, and transforms that goodness into something terrible. The noble villain is the cautionary tale of every age, the figure who reminds us that the difference between savior and tyrant is smaller than we'd like to believe. There are villains we fear, there are villains we hate, then there are villains we study. Megatron belongs to the third category, the villains who are not merely antagonists, but philosophies wearing a mask. We return to Megatron because his story asks questions we cannot escape. How does a revolution lose its way? How does justice turn into punishment? How does a leader become a tyrant while believing he is still a savior? Megatron forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that evil does not always come from darkness. Sometimes, it comes from a spark that once burned with hope. We return to Megatron because he is the story of ambition unrestrained, because he is the shape noble intentions take when they rot, because he embodies the terrifying notion that you can be tragically, catastrophically wrong, while believing with your whole spark that you're right. In that way, Megatron is not just a villain, he is a warning passed down across generations, because the one who wants to fix the world and cannot imagine anyone else doing it. Megatron teaches us that tyranny does not begin with cruelty. It begins with clarity, with certainty, with the belief that violence is merely another tool in the hands of the righteous. We return to Megatron because the world continues to create men like him, leaders who idealism calcifies into absolutism, who love justice more than they love people, and Megatron becomes the myth they ask. What happens when someone tries to save a broken system by breaking it further? And Megatron embodies the guiding principle they face. What happens when someone tries to save a broken system by breaking it further? Megatron's legacy is not one story. It's the constellation of contradictions, a liberator who became an oppressor, a miner who became a king, a visionary who could not see himself clearly, a murderer who later sought mercy, a tyrant who sometimes longed for peace, a revolutionary who forgot what he was fighting for, a monster who believed he was still a messiah. These contradictions do not weaken him, they define him. Megatron is compelling because he contains multitudes, because he is the kind of villain who reveals a truth we rarely admit. The distance between hero and tyrant is measured not in intentions, but in humility. And Megatron never learned the humility. Not in the mines, not in the gladiator pits, not on the throne of Cybertron, not even at the end of his long, violent life. His legacy, then, is neither victory nor redemption. It's this: a tyrant who meant well and destroyed everything anyway. When the last blast fades and the battlefield cools, when the Autobots honor their fallen and the Decepticons reckon with what they've become, what remains of Megatron? Not his victories, not his empire, not even his sins. What remains is the question he forces us to ask. How do you stop yourself from becoming the villain who once fought? Megatron's story ends differently in every universe, but his legacy, his true legacy, never changes. He is the spark that warns us that power without humility becomes tyranny, and certainty without compassion becomes cruelty. Megatron's myth survived because it must, because every generation needs a reminder that even the brightest ideals can cast the darkest shadows, that even the most righteous cause can become a cage in the hands of the wrong leader. In the end, Megatron does not teach us how to fight a tyrant, He teaches us how to not become one. Thank you for joining us on this long descent into the life of Megatron. To understand him, you can't start with the Empire, or the Decepticon crest, or the silence of the worlds he burned. You have to go back to the minds of Kaon, back to the chains, back to the spark who believed the universe had forgotten him. Because everything Megatron became, the revolutionary, the tyrant, the fallen king, all of it begins in the darkness. Down there, he learned a truth he never forgot. The power makes gods of the unworthy, and ghosts of the innocent. And he swore he would never be either one. But here's the tragedy. The Senate hated him. He became them. Not in their wealth, not in their refinement, but in their certainty, their conviction that order must be forced, their belief that dissent was treason, the insistence that the world would only be saved when it obeyed. Megatron didn't inherit their cruelty, he recreated it, because in trying to be the savior, he became the judge, and no one is worthy of that throne. Not Optimus, not the Primes, not the Senate, not even Megatron himself. He wanted to free Cybertron, but freedom enforced by one spark is not freedom at all. It's devotion, it's obedience, it is worship carved out of fear. And yet, beneath the armor, beneath the brutality, beneath the centuries of violence, there is still the trace of a miner who wanted a better world, and that's the part that haunts us. Because Megatron is not a monster made of malice, he is a tyrant made of ideals, a leader who once saw injustice clearly and loved justice more than he loved people, a revolutionary who wanted to break the system, became the system's final unanswerable sin. His legacy is not the Decepticons, it's a warning they carry, that the difference between a hero and a tyrant is not strength, but humility. That certainty can hollow a spark faster than hatred, that righteousness can damn a world faster than cruelty. Megatron didn't fall because he was weak, he fell because he convinced he couldn't, and in that belief, he forged a destiny even darker than the minds that birthed him. History remembers him as a warlord, a conqueror, a tyrant, but the truth is far simpler, and far more terrifying. He didn't fall, he chose, and maybe, in this place, he would too. If this resonated with you, I'd love to hear it. Which Megatron shaped you the most and why? Drop a comment, let's keep this conversation going. And if you want more deep dives like this, hit subscribe, we're just getting started. So stay sharp, stay grounded, and as always, stay handsome. And remember, even the noblest ideas can cast the darkest shadows.